saying, "How do you do?" You're another one of us. And we're going to explain to you what's going on. Playing the following games, and these are the rules of the games. And if you will please understand these rules, you will later on maybe be able to think up better ones. But what we do is we mystify children. And we put them through all kinds of complicated grades of initiation. And most of us, therefore, grow up as still children. We grow up always thinking that there is a parent above us. And if our parents are long ago dead, and now I'm a grandfather, I have 5 grandchildren. And therefore I'm able to, I suppose, assume in their eyes as much authority and as much dignity as my own grandfather did. But I know I'm just as stupid as he was. So, because you see, in our most impressionable years, we get the idea constantly, there is someone up there and behind who knows the answers. And to a certain extent they do, because they're more experienced, they've practiced skills, they're more developed in certain ways. But we never are really able to get people to grow up, to come into the state of adulthood, without still taking the infantile attitude. There is someone who knows the answers better than we do. And therefore, we always have, through this kind of childhood indoctrination, an attitude towards the universe and towards the ultimate reality behind it, as if we were on probation, as if somehow we were interceding. We were saying constantly to the Lord God, "Please forgive me for having the disgusting effrontery to exist." And that goes back, you see, to archaic notions of the world, as if it were a political state modeled after the political states of the ancient Near East, where great tyrant kings were the fathers and rulers of the people. I'm constantly puzzled as to how the citizens of a republic, such as the United States, who are supposed to believe that a republic is the best form of government, can believe that the universe is a monarchy. It is a completely inconsistent idea. If the universe is a monarchy, then the monarchy is the best form of government. And you ought to have one here. No, I rather feel, if I can put this into words at all, this sort of experience, that we are not strangers in this universe. Although we've all been somehow, slightly with our own connivance, been hoodwinked into thinking that we are. And we say, "I came into this world. I feel myself put upon by fate, by chance, by my environment, or whatever." And we take the attitude that we are in some way or other victims of the scheme of things. And therefore, most of what we experience is defined as what happens to us. And only a very small part of what we experience is defined as that which we ourselves do and wish and decide upon. So we feel experience as a conflict, on the one hand, between our efforts and willing and wishing, and on the other hand, what simply happens. And therefore we feel sort of tossed about like ships on an enormous swell in relation to the rest of the world. But when you really consider your own existence, You can't account for it as something introduced into this world from outside. What you are as a total being, that is not only what you think and are aware of, but also all that you don't think about and aren't aware of. The whole structure of your organism. That you are this is a symptom, an expression of the whole thing that's going on. In a certain sense, you are just as much a part of an essential expression of the universe as the sun is, or a galaxy is. Only, we tend to think of ourselves as discontinuous with the whole thing. In this way, when you look, let's say, at a photograph in a newspaper, you look at it with a magnifying glass, the picture disappears, and you see only an area of dots. But when you stand away from it and drop the magnifying glass, the dots merge into a face. So when you look at anything close up, you don't see its relatedness to everything else. Look at the dots under the magnifying glass, and you don't see their connection with the face. So our view of our own personal lives, our own work, and our own personal circumstances is a very close-up view. And we don't see how it fits in with some larger design. We're too close to it. And we can argue it doesn't fit in. We feel we really are separate. We're not connected with this whole thing. Our life, my life as an individual, is just a flash between two darknesses. Well, there are all sorts of other flashes going on. Before we were born and after we die. Flash, 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 flash. But between all these different flashes, which are like the dots in the newspaper photograph, there are, for those who want to see, connections. After all, you think of your body as a connected, unified reality. But if you look at your body from a certain point of view, you are composed of molecules that are vastly separate in space. But because those molecules are so tiny, and the separations between them so tiny as to escape your notice, you don't see that you're nothing as you stretch out your apparently solid arm. This is just all the way down. See? Is that some bird? So, yeah. It's all right. Don't interrupt him. He's going to make a very amusing comments at certain points. But you see this, that when you take the small in view, you don't see the connectedness. And therefore, you would say now, is this the solidity, the continuity of this arm, is that real? And a person who always thinks in terms of the microscopic would say, no, it's not real, it's only an illusion. The reality is all those separate molecules. Then the physicist comes along to him and says, that's a lot of nonsense. Those molecules aren't there at all. They're only minute electrons and other subnuclear particles. But actually, you see, everybody's point of view is correct. It is correct that there are these widely separated little particles, but it is also correct that there is a unity through the whole thing. So in just the same way, we looking myopically at our own lives and seeing ourselves all as separate bodies and feeling that each one of us has a separate time beginning with birth and ending with death, we are blind to the way in which each one of us is really absolutely integrated with everything else that's going on. But so long as we're all brought up to feel that we are here on sufferance, then we are to that extent emotionally prejudiced against seeing that each one of us is really a particular way of looking at all that there is, and a particular way of being responsible for all that there is. You, in other words, yes, you did it, and are to be praised or blamed, or neither, for everything that's happening. When we say, well, that wasn't my fault, it was those scapegoats, whether they be Jews, communists, Turks, infidels, heretics, Chinese, Vietnamese, Africans, any Catholics, Birchers, New Leftists, anybody you can think of you don't like, you can always say, well, they started it. They're the cause of trouble. But the real secret is that you're responsible for everything that's going on. And there is in you everything that is angelic about human beings and everything that's diabolic. And the question is, how do you play those two together? So putting it in this way, then, I would say simply that life is the play, and I underline the word play, of a single energy. And you are that energy. That energy, like all energy, is a pulsation. And therefore we have the appearance and disappearance of its pulses. You could say, I, defined as a certain human body called Alan Watts, am the pulse of this energy. And therefore I have my presence is inseparable from my absence, as is the case with all waves and pulses. A wave must have an upside and a downside, or shall we say a crest and a trough, where it is and where it isn't. And so every pulse of the universal energy has an on and an off. We call that life and death. Or it may be waking and sleeping, or now you see it, now you don't. And this thing is just what we all are. From the highest point of view, it never makes mistakes. When you watch the clouds, did you ever accuse a cloud of being aesthetically malformed? Did you ever think that mountains were to be criticized for their outline? Did you ever think that the stars were badly arranged? Patterns in foam had something to be desired? No. But of course we feel that about ourselves just because of our close point of view to ourselves. If we looked at ourselves sub specie eternitatis, from the standpoint of eternity, we should see that our lives in every detail and in every respect were as harmonious and exquisite as the patterns on seashells. And we should find that everything that was a mistake, that was done wrong, was actually an integral part of a harmonious relationship. Only we couldn't see it that way from our limited point of view. So one could say that at the highest level, this universe is an incomparable jewel of harmonious, dancing, patterning energy. Very intelligent. in the sense of what do we mean by intelligence? A complex, harmonious design. Included in this harmonious design is, of course, the fact that we feel it not to be so. Our objections to what we wrongly think of as the disharmony of the universe, the very fact that those objections occur are an integral part of the harmony. So that if I feel furious with somebody like Hitler because he kills ever so many people like the massacre of the Jews, I would not say that it was wrong for me to feel furious, but simply that too, if his slaying of the Jews is after all part of this harmonious thing, so is my fury about it. And that, from the highest point of view, the most inclusive point of view, it all goes together. And if you understand that, if you actually feel in your bones, if you sense that as a vivid sensation, a very curious thing happens to you. You are able to function in your everyday life without hang-ups. It's like this. Everybody is really using an enormous amount of energy protecting themselves. Protect ourselves if we were challenged to do so. We waste an incredible amount of psychic energy in the state of inner cramp, tension, of anxiety about what will happen if, supposing. Now, put yourselves in the position of realizing that you're walking and dancing around in a space like a trapeze artist, but there's no concrete below you to fall on. You can do anything you want, any crazy act, flip any way you wish, and although you may go through the illusion of a crash, there is never a real crash. You've nothing to lose, because you are, in fact, the whole works. Only, the whole works has a most interesting device in it, which is pretending that it's in danger, that it could come to a final end. This is the familiar phenomenon of goosing yourself, of giving yourself a scare, that the universe were a system that crept up behind itself and said, whoa, so it jumps, you see? And each jump is like the new spring of the grasshopper going along. Every time it gets to itself, boom, it jumps, see? Boom, jumps like this. Because you have to understand this is terribly important. A lot of people think, you see, that the goal of life, the thing that you really should get hold of is power, to be in control. And you can take all kinds of lessons on master your life, be in control of this, be in control of that. Now let me let you into a secret. What the real meaning of all these things is, that when you study the whole philosophy and psychology of power, and you really go to the end of it, you'll find that that's not what you want. Imagine, let your fantasy go. Make yourself the master magician. You can read everybody's mind. You know the future completely and clearly. You need not be subject to the ordinary conditions of nature. Supposing, for example, you could renew your body all the time and never need to die. Supposing you could be anywhere you wanted to be in the universe at the slight quiver of a wind. Go through this, think this through. Everybody thinks they want power. But if you really think through what situation you would be in if you had absolute power, you would say, man, who needs it? You wouldn't want it, because you would be completely bored. So power is not the thing we really want. There is nothing more instructive in the world than to think out systematically and thoroughly what it is that you do want. And curiously enough, the best you will come to is that you don't know. Because you want a surprise. Now, you can't surprise yourself. You see? If you're in control and you plan a surprise, it's obviously not a surprise. But you see, once you could imagine God, who came to the conclusion in eternity that he knew it all. He had to create something and said to it, surprise me. And that was man. Of course it was God. Because God had a system in himself whereby he could let his left hand not know what his right hand was doing. It's like when you play chess with yourself and you take each side in the game, quite honestly, and try to make it win. One of the most interesting exercises, take a couple of knitting needles or those cocktail picks that look like swords and have a fencing match between your left hand and your right hand and really try to get digs in. But let the other hand be equally defensive against the digs. It's very interesting. That's a good exercise in yoga to do that. Find out a lot about yourself that way. Let not your left hand know what your right hand doeth. But that's the sort of system we're in. That's like this universe. Because if you understand that you don't want power, not really, you always want to be getting a little more power, but you don't want final power. Because then nothing would happen. It's just like when you're playing a game, maybe bridge, maybe chess, or whatever it is. And at the moment that the outcome of the game becomes certain, you cancel the game and begin again. Because there's no fun in a game with a certain outcome. Might just as well not play it. Because any future that is certain is already past in the sense that you've had it. So, I look at what we're doing in this world, every one of us is a particular expression at a particular time and a particular place of the whole thing. Basically, you are the witch than which there is no witch. You are the God. And you don't have to think of that in terms of an old gentleman. You are basically the Godhead. This energy, latent energy, is capable of expressing itself in mirror. Each one with a different point of view. Like your eyes, look out of your head. Each one with a different point of view. Of your nerve ends. There in your skin, almost like the arms on a little snail. All feeling around. Everyone is you, looking from a different point of view towards the world. So, in turn, I can see all human beings' eyes as many, many horns on a cosmic snail. All looking out from a single center. All of us. Appearing and disappearing, coming and going. We pop out, we pop in. We are born and we die. We are thrown out and withdrawn. And as you watch this, you see, from a larger point of view, you see a throbbing rhythm, each time coming out with a different variation. One day we could call it John Doe, the next time it's Jimmy Smith, the next time it's, it throbs. It has little subtle variations in it each time, each one worthy of being given a different name. But it's all the same energy doing this.
Oh my God, King's running his fucking mouth still.
Obviously,
Midnight, this guy. This guy got opinions at midnight, 2 in the morning, 5 in the morning, 7 in the morning, 10 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon. King, get a job. Get a girlfriend. Get some money. Do something with your life. Don't just come out clown house like a fucking schoolgirl. Chit-chat.
And that all it's going to be is that you've got to struggle along as you can, and maybe raise some children to struggle along in the same idiotic way you do, and then give up. And you generally feel frustrated and cheated by the whole scheme of things, because you do not acknowledge that you are responsible for it. That you got yourself into this situation. That you were the evil gleam in your father's eye when he pursued your mother. You were your father. Because he feels in just the same situation you did. He feels he's an eye, too, cast into this world. And he may have been brought up, just like you, to feel that he had nothing to do with anything else, that he was somehow disconnected from the whole scheme of things, and merely experiencing it passively as something that happens to you, that is thrown upon you. So long as you choose to feel about things in that way, you complain and you are frustrated, and you're fighting and bitching about the whole thing, which is, of course, all right, because that's what you want to do. Only that you could see there's a certain joke in that. Indicates that it could be different. That you don't need to be in that state of mind in regard to it. That you could wake up from this illusion of separateness and understand that you aren't just a little animalcule crawling around on the surface of a globular rock that revolves around an insignificant star on the outer edge of one of the minor galaxies. But that you are a special case of the center. What there is and all that there is. You know, it's interesting that in a view of the universe which sees space as curved, imagine for a moment, this is not quite correct, but that all objects in space are on the surface of a sphere. Then you will see at once that every point on the surface of a sphere can be regarded as the center of the surface. Where is the central point of the surface of the sphere? Anyway. So in this way, we can legitimately regard every point in this universe as being the center of the whole thing. And it's in this multi-centered sense that every eye which looks around and sees the world as something that spins around you in your the axis, you're quite correct. It does. But you know how it is when you hold in your hand a gyroscope. Isn't it? It always feels alive, doesn't it? Because it surprises you. It wants to move in a direction which you didn't predict. And that movement of the gyroscope that you hold, that seems to be against you, is the movement in life we call other, or what happens to us. When we feel, on the other hand, that I am moving the gyroscope in the direction I want it to go, that's what we call self. That's what we call voluntary. And you can't possibly know the one without the other. You don't know what you mean by self unless you know what you mean by other. And you don't know what you mean by the voluntary, what I want to happen, except in contrast and play against the involuntary, what happens to me. But just as in the gyroscope, The voluntary and the involuntary, the self and the other, are two poles of the same experience. So, when you understand this, it is as if you had become one with or had a firm grasp of the axis of the gyroscope. And you know that when the north side is going the way I want it, the south side is going in the opposite way. And it's really all one. Only it has to polarize itself in this way so that there shall be something happening. That's the condition of the game. So then, we can say then there are two poles in another way. We'll call one pole involution and the other pole evolution. Involution is all that aspect of life in which we get involved in the schemes, in the games, in the conflict, in the quarrels. So involved that we lose sight of the forest for the trees. And there comes a point, as in every movement, where that is so extreme that it has to swing up again in another direction, where we see the forest over and above the trees. And that is evolution. Where we, for example, in our present day culture, have gone through a historical sort of psychological historical development which has emphasized our consciousness of ourselves as individuals to an extraordinary degree. Never before in the history of man have people concerned themselves so much with the plight of the individual. Never before have there been such social services that would take every person into consideration, or at least go through the motions of doing so. Never before was it thought important that every individual should have the chance, say, of being given hospital treatment and sickness, all these sort of things. See? But in doing this, we've raised a new kind of problem. The individual, having been brought to so great a realization of his individuality because of the importance which society places upon it, isn't quite sure that that's where he wanted to be. Be careful of what you desire, you may get it. The individual so critically emphasized, therefore turns towards going beyond individuality. Now, he can do that in two ways. He can go beyond individuality by submerging himself. That is to say, by mindless and thoughtless adoption of a fanaticism. By joining some mass movement, some fanatical religion, some form of screwy politics. And by working for this cause, be equally delivered from individuality as if he became stone drunk. It's the same thing. There's nothing much to choose between the two. Or by going right to the extreme of individuality, instead of trying to forget one's lonely self-ego feeling, go right into it. And through becoming an individual as intensely as you can become one, becoming as separate as you can get, you will discover in a very natural way that you are the eternal self behind the whole thing. There's that wonderful passage that is quoted in Memoirs of the poet Tennyson, where he describes the way in which, as a young boy, he often used to be alone and used to repeat his own name to himself, saying, Alfred, Alfred. And you know, you got feeling that this thing called Alfred, this particular eye, is kind of spooky. You look at yourself in the mirror. Don't look away, you know. Other people feel awkward when they look at themselves in the mirror. They don't quite want to look at themselves. Sometimes you feel your own pulse. You feel that thing going throb, throb inside you, your finger starts to itch, and you want to rub it off like that. You see? Your own inner processes, your own gut, is something queer. But if you don't turn away from that, you keep looking right into your own eyes in the mirror. At first you say, you rascal, you fraud, you devil. You go on looking. You go deeper and deeper and deeper looking into your own eyes. Then Tennyson goes on to say, after he'd said this name Alfred to himself several times, got this extraordinary feeling coming over him, in which he knew with total certainty that beyond this little thing called Alfred, there was this absolutely eternal life that was forever and ever, was the root and ground of everything. I don't know if you've ever had the experience of going back in your mind to childhood and feeling that there's an immeasurably ancient you behind your childhood. A very knowing, ancient of days. But that's what happens, you see, when you go through the experience of individuality to an extreme point. It very naturally explodes into the universal. Whereas if you withdraw from individuality, you're liable never to come across that. You just get caught up in the fashions and fads and customary escapes, which are the solace of most people. That's, you see, the reason for being a hermit. Hermits are people who pursue individuality to an extreme. They go off into complete solitude. And the most interesting thing you will find in the state of complete solitude, when you get really alone, you find that you're connected with everything. Because what happens in complete solitude is that your ears become sensitized. And you hear all the sounds you weren't accustomed to hearing. You hear your own heartbeat. You hear the singing in your own ears. You hear the buzz of innumerable tiny insects you never paid attention to before. You hear the sound of the wind and every leaf responding to it. And you suddenly realize that the leaves rippling to the wind and your eardrums rippling to it are all one process. That you, indeed, are like a whirlpool in a stream. The pattern is constant, but the water is always changing. You are a shimmering manifestation like the flame of a candle, which is really a stream of gas that's never for 2 minutes the same. You are a dancing vibration, and on either end of you is the whole energy of the universe flowing through what is called you and wiggling in the recognizable form and then going on, you see? You are a wave waving of this energy. And we're all that, you see, it's doing that. The hermit finds this out. Because by going into complete isolation, he discovers there is no isolation. He becomes so sensitive to every tiniest vibration. And when he discovers that, then the good hermit comes back into the world. And even though he's involved in the busyness and turmoil of everyday life, he still sees this. So what is important for us to learn? We're all most of us, involved in some kind of frantic business. And what I want to suggest to you is that this frantic business can be your yoga, your way of liberation. If you don't have to get out of it, you don't necessarily have to drop out, although that's important for some people. Depends whether you have the vocation to drop out or whether you have the vocation to stay in. But I would not only say would help to make your everyday life into a yoga, but that you won't really be able to stand it if you don't. It's not, as some people say, can we Westerners practice Oriental disciplines? If the question is, if you can't, you're not going to survive. You won't be able to take it. So let's get to the point of view where we can see certain types of activity which are normally associated with extreme anxiety, such as various forms of business where we always worry whether we're going to make the payments, whether we're going to make the profit, whether we're going to do this, that, and the other. And day to day, there's this constant anxiety going on. Now, there is a point of view from which those activities can be conducted as complete play and dancing. When you realize that you don't give a damn how it comes out. And it's only when you get to the point that you don't give a damn that you can afford to do these sort of things at all. If you do give a damn, you can't afford to get involved in that kind of business. It'll just wreck your nerves and give you ulcers. So it's terribly important not to give a damn. We ordinarily think that people who don't give a damn will collapse on the job, will have no motivation. That's because they're not striving for power anymore. They realize that the striving for power is futile. So if you realize that striving for power is futile, what else will you do? What other zest will there be? A lot of people think that if you deprive people of the urge for power, they will have no motivation to do anything. What would be the motivation, shall we call it, if you're not interested in power? Why would you do anything? Why would you make any effort if it isn't that you want to control things? Well, you put in the place of the striving for power. Fun. Yeah. Or to be surprised.
I think you said it when you were describing warrior here.
Yeah.
You were saying, I say these things because the same reason the bird says.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Right.
For you, that's your substitute for striving for power.
Right.
But I would do what I do.
Yes, but you will realize now at once that there are several alternatives. There isn't only the fun, which is one of them, but there's also compassion, where you see a lot of human beings are really suffering, and you can feel now, goodness, that's not necessary. You don't have to do it that way. And this may supply a great deal of energy, you see. But the moment your energy is released from the power game and from the self-protection game, it's free to do all kinds of other things. You get a tremendous access. Now, wait a minute. Let's have an intermission now, and then we can bring up questions after about 5 minutes intermission. Okay? Well, now, in pursuing the subject further of yoga as everyday activity, I presume it is understood just what the word yoga, used in a very general sense, involves. The Indians use two words what I'm talking about. One is yoga, and the other is sadhana, meaning essentially a method or way, the objective of which is for the individual to rediscover, to realize his true identity. That is to say, not who he may be defined as a particular expression of life, but discovers his identity as deeply and essentially one with the whole eternal process of life, with what I'll call, for want of a better word, the timeless energy that expresses itself as this world, or all worlds, or all possible worlds. That's you, in a very deep and real sense, you. The most real, firm, basic sense in which you can say the word I at all. But since this is not ordinarily realized, because we are myopic, that is to say, by looking at life close up and in narrow areas, we become fascinated with the contests, with the problems, with the games that are going on. Just, for example, as if you examined your own bloodstream under a microscope, you would see tremendous battles going on between all kinds of microorganisms. And if you watched it long enough, you'd start taking sides. You'd start to be worried about which one was going to win. And you would feel the crunching of the bodies of microbes as it were in your own bones. And you would therefore forget that you are a healthy human being just because that fight is going on in your bloodstream. The fight at one level, the conflict at one level, is peace at a higher level. And life is all the way like that, all the way up. So that you can imagine what a whopping big piece there is at the top level. When you think of our conflicts as human beings, as the conflicts of microbes, redounding to the health of a higher order of systems. And then if you go into mythology and think of the conflicts between devas and asuras, the angelic principles, Wawi, you know, what a thing that is. And yet that is at a higher level peace. So when we are myopic, that is to say, when we are working and living with a narrow view of what is going on, then we're anxious and depressed or fearful or whatever it may be, because we have lost contact with our full selves. Now, of course, we enter this way of looking at things because for many, many centuries, human beings have specialized in one certain aspect of their total mind activity, let's call it that. We've concentrated on our faculty for conscious attention. And this is, in a way, what might be called the fall of man. We have, you see, this ingenious and valuable faculty of narrowing our gaze upon selected areas. If we take the visual field, first of all, you are actually receiving everything that is in this great oval, the visual field. But you're not noticing everything in it. In order to notice, you have to focus your attention on some particular face, or shoe, or bag, or pattern, or whatever it may be. And then you're more liable to be able to recall in memory those little grasps of attention than you would any random detail in the whole thing. If somebody says to me, just by chance, what was so-and-so wearing at this gathering, although I've seen you several times, I won't remember if I didn't pay particular attention to it. Now, hand in hand with this kind of radar perception of the world, we scan the environment and pick on things which we think are significant. And we select things that are significant with the aid of having words and therefore markers or tags which we can put on to these particular grasps of perception. And so we come to be completely fascinated in this way of looking at things. It is therefore at the root of reason, of conscious calculation of all kinds. It's at the root of science. But it is, in fact, although it has extraordinary advantages, it is a very limited way of responding to the world because it's clumsy. And it is not the only way in which we respond and fit in with the world, because all the time going on underneath our conscious attention is an interaction between our own organisms and the total physical environment of immense complexity, and which for the most part escapes our attention. We are doing our bodies, but we haven't the faintest idea in terms of language how we're doing it. You don't know how you managed to get born. Not really. You know a few skimpy details, but you don't know how to grow a fetus in a womb, how to arrange the marvelous balances which keep that fetus warm and fed. You don't know how to shape your bones, but you do it. But this has nothing to do with your conscious attention. And therefore we may be constantly astounded at the miracles performed by, say, a nervous system upon which our power of conscious attention is based, but which conscious attention itself does not comprehend. The nervous system is still too complicated for our most advanced neurologists to understand in any but a very partial way. And therefore, all great skill in any kind of work of art or craft or any human activity depends upon your being able to do it in the same way that you grow your hair and shape your bones. To be able to go beyond performing whatever you do by mere power of conscious attention. Because that is a really very superficial faculty. It's like radar on a boat. And the function of the radar on the boat is merely to watch out for rocks and any novel thing that occurs in the environment. Consciousness is directed towards novelty. And those things which stimulate the nervous system all the time disappear from consciousness. They are beneath notice because they're constant. That's the difficulty of, say, monogamy. When you have the same girl stimulating you all the time, you tend not to notice her. And likewise husband. See? That's the problem with all constant features of life. They begin to slip from attention. But that's a pity, because then we become unaware of the incredible harmoniousness of all the features in our environment which are constant. The absolute beauty of this interchange, transaction between our organisms and the total environment, which if we became aware of it, we would be in a state of total bliss. But because our conscious attention is geared to looking out for differences and for things that are new and novel, and because we've become over-fascinated with it, we are mostly blind to the miracle and the joyous performance of life which is going on all the time. So then, one of the major aspects of any doing a work, whether it be washing dishes or managing a bank or flying planes or whatever it is, you can learn to do that work effortlessly in the same way as you effortlessly make your physical organism function. And only when you arrive at that point is the work that you're doing really good. And everybody knows this to some extent in whatever work it is that you do. If you are at all an expert in anything at all, I don't care what it is, it may be simply that you're expert at riding a bicycle, or swimming, or talking, or it may be cooking or something like that. If you really achieve any degree of mastery in the art, you do it by the very fact that you don't do it. You in the ordinary sense. But you as a total living organism, which is in turn a function of the whole universe. When that is doing it, it's always incredibly competent. And what we would like to know is the difference between doing it that way, doing it the hard way, that is to say by conscious effort, and a third possibility, the purely sloppy way, where it appears that a person is doing something effortlessly, and they're really doing it very badly. It's just a mess. This culture today is confused between spontaneous behavior and messy behavior. Of course, that is because we are primarily educated to do everything consciously. An enormous amount, say, of sociological studies and psychological studies, when you read them through, the conclusions to which they arrive are just common sense. Everybody knew that already. But they've got a PhD by proving it. That is to say, by analyzing how things happen naturally so that you can put them down in formulae of words or formulae of numbers. And then we say, now we know, because we've translated it into these terms. And all academic knowledge is the minute measurement of what goes on in the world, in the hope that if we measure it this minutely, we shall be able to predict what it will do next, and in this way control it. And up to a point, that's very successful. But there comes a point when it's not so successful. Because in ordinary affairs of life, we do not have time nor the expensive instruments to make these minute examinations of our problems and what we're supposed to do. We have to make decisions long before any kind of rational process could have worked out the right thing to do. Life comes at us that quickly, and we really have to make ever so many decisions at once. And therefore, you cannot rely on your ordinary conscious calculation to make these decisions. And if you're not trained and accustomed to trusting your unconscious brain to make the decisions for you, you're at a great disadvantage. And therefore, basic to all this kind of thing is learning to trust your own apparatus. You have, therefore, inside your head, the best computer that exists at all, anywhere. And it's there to be used. It's there for you to give it problems, and instead of your trying by muscular efforts to work out those problems, to let your own computer do it for you. And you will always be confused when you first try this. Firstly, because you can hardly believe anything can be worked out that way. And secondly, because you will accept answers from it before it's ready, or after it's ready, because you didn't accept the first thing you thought of as the answer. For example, when people are trained in aircraft identification, they expose outlines of different types of aircraft on a screen where they're exposed for only 1,000th of a second. And then that's the speed with which you need to be able to recognize different kinds of aircraft. Or then they put on the same screen 8-figure numbers. And the art of recognition is always to go for the first thing you thought of. If you get an 8-figure number, don't stop to think. Just write down the first 8-figure number you can think of. And in a short time, you find you are recording what came on the screen quite accurately. Because you're trusting your real first thought. But you see, this is a thing so contrary to the way we're ordinarily brought up that we have a good deal of trepidation about doing it. And this, for this reason, most people find it convenient and safe to do this kind of experimentation at first in things that are not important. That's why you might, for example, take up the art of painting or pottery or archery or something that is simply a recreation and not your main business in life, and learn first of all to do this unimportant thing in this way, so that you get enough confidence to be able to apply it to those aspects of your life which you feel to be important. And so that's why, say, in Japan, many people take up an art outside their ordinary business. They'll take up tea ceremony, or flower arrangement, or judo, or kendo, which is fencing, or even Zen practice. Because this is something aside from the normal business of life, in which they will get the training of how to have complete faith in your own organism, in what the Zen master Bankei, who taught in the 17th century, called your unborn mind. That is to say, the mind, he explained it this way, that when you hear a bird call, you instantly recognize a bird calling. When you hear a bell, you instantly know it's a bell. That is to say, your unconscious, this is what really the word unborn means, unmanifest, your unmanifest mind has this tremendous skill. And one learns to bring it out in exemplary ways, and so you gain the faith to live that way all the time. Now, let me say that in doing this, it is of help to understand that in a certain way you do live that way all the time because you can't help it. You are actually interfering with the normal functioning of your life by making all sorts of anxieties and stratagems and inner plans and thinking about what to do if this happens and what to do if that happens. And most of this is not helping you at all. It's just getting in the way of your ordinary functioning. Only you feel that you must do it in exactly the same way as a person afflicted by superstition walks down a sidewalk and must not tread on any lines. The feeling that I ought to is fun to do that, of course, but if you take it too seriously and feel that you must not avoid those lines, you're completely interfering with your walk. And we're doing that all the time. So, if you realize the extent to which you are ordinarily quite leading quite a civilized life, but that you are doing it from, in the sense of by conscious will and effort, it's your innate sense, your innate intelligence that's taking care of it all. Furthermore, it helps too to realize that you are not safe, however well protected you may be. I notice that when people solve their so-called physical problems, when, for example, you didn't have enough money, and then you get enough money, then you start worrying about your health. And then, of course, you can take reasonable precautions about your health if you get the right shots and immunizations and so on. But there's absolutely no way whatsoever of foolproof avoidance of accidents. Despite the best predictions of physicians, you can always get a heart trouble suddenly, or kidney trouble or something. And there is no safety. And therefore, going along with realizing that you quite ordinarily do transact the affairs of life in this through your unconscious intelligence, you also realize there is really no way of protecting yourself. And an enormous amount of energy you use to protect yourself is completely wasted. In other words, you may discover through becoming aware of your own body that you're in a constant state of tension, as if ready to jump, ready to defend yourself, or even you're trying to hold your body together. Charlotte Selver finds that when she gets people to lie on the floor and relax, they can't do it because they are in fact trying to hold their bodies together in the fear that if they didn't, they would disappear into a kind of jello and slop all over the floor. And all that, you see, all that constant sense of I should control what's going on is completely wasted energy, for the simple reason that conscious attention is not really the effective controlling force in your life. It's merely the lookout. It's merely an information source which warns the organism as a whole of unusual features of the environment, unusual changes. That's why conscious attention tends to notice things that move rather than things that are relatively still. Why it tends to notice figures rather than backgrounds. Because it is the radar of the organism, it is the troubleshooter. And if you identify yourself with your troubleshooter, well then you become one-sided and you become a perpetually anxious person. Whereas on the other hand, if you see that you are identified principally not with that troubleshooter, but with the whole organism, then you become identified rather with that aspect of your being which is in a constantly harmonious relationship to its environment. We can, of course, explore at another moment in the seminar those peculiar times of relationship to the environment when the organism is being burnt up in a forest fire or something of that kind, and how it responds to all those changes of circumstance that are, as we say from the relative point of view, destructive to the organism. But actually, actually the organism and the environment are not two things. The environment is not the enemy of the organism, nor is the organism the enemy of the environment. Their behavior goes together in a constant and rhythmic expression of the greater organism, of which they are both aspects. And the more your vision is widened, and the more you live from that point of view, the more you see the total lack of necessity of being on the defensive all the time. Furthermore, as soon as you're not on the defensive and not trying to hold on to your control of life, by reason of the greater energy available to you, and by reason of your, I would say, basically friendly and cooperative and open attitude to other people, you are, by this non-defending attitude, much better protected than you would otherwise be. Because it's people who've got a chip on their shoulders and who are on the defensive who are always troublemakers. Whereas people who are, generally speaking, friendly to whomever they relate, don't get into difficulty very easily. They don't create difficulties. It's the same thing as cats. When cats fall, cats are relaxed and therefore don't get hurt. And so my father once, when he was a young man, was suddenly slipped on a staircase. It's a very steep one. And fell down, and it happened so quickly he didn't have time to resist. And therefore he wasn't hurt at all. This, you see, is the principle of falling in judo. You learn to fall in a certain kind of cat-like, heavy, loose way. And so when you get thrown, you don't get hurt. And experts can fall on concrete and still not be hurt. Well, not just on padded mats and things like that. So all this comes about not so much through a system or effort, but it comes about through a clear understanding of what your situation actually is. Face the facts. We talk, you know, of facing facts as something difficult. Preachers and politicians are always talking about hard facts and down-to-earth realities, as if there was something very unpleasant that we had to wake up to. But I would rather say that the facts of our situation of the world aren't so bad. I mean, that if we did arrive at the facts, we would find that many things that we call hard facts and difficult problems are simply the result of not facing the facts, of not seeing what our situation is, of not realizing that we are completely vulnerable, and there's no way of being otherwise. We are unprotected, and that, however, protecting ourselves is not the way of life that evolution has favored. You see, contrast the mollusks and the mammals. The mollusks have hard shells on the outside and the soft flesh inside the shells. The mammals have the soft flesh on the outside and the hard bones in the middle of the flesh. Now, this species is more viable biologically because it is more sensitive. And so it's found that this is why we abandoned armor in warfare, because it so constricted motion and so reduced vision and sensibility and speed of movement that it really didn't work out. And so in the same way, you can think of the disastrous French experiment of trusting in a Maginot Line. What a flop that was. And all elaborate defense systems are illusions. They don't work. Because life is basically lived as an act of faith. It is an adventure into the unknown. So, to the degree you see that you come to your senses and see that's the way things are, whether you like it or not. This realization alone is the greatest help in actually attaining the attitude of let-go-ness and the understanding of let-go-ness and all the new energy that comes with it. Don't, therefore, say, you see, it doesn't really help to what I call think positive, in the sense of repeating to yourself, all is peace, all is love, I am letting go, I'm trusting, God loves me, and all that. It's easier to do it the other way. That there is no safety. See, everything is falling apart. I'm as good as dead already, and therefore stop resisting it, you see? In this way, you see, you're not fighting things. You're taking the fact and allowing them to help you. So then, you will naturally, therefore, begin to find as you do this, that you seem, for example, in doing everyday things, to be getting happy hunches and to be a center of interesting and fortunate accidents. People, for example, have often found that when they stopped worrying about where the money is going to come from, it starts turning up. That you get good ideas suddenly come to you, like a comedian on the stage when he's making gags. And he doesn't plan the situation in advance because he doesn't know what kind of a situation is going to arise. But somehow something works for him, so that he's constantly witty and has these comebacks which make everybody laugh. I had a friend who was saved in a most desperate situation by this faculty. He was attached to a unit in the Second World War in Asia under the command of Melvyn Douglas. And they were a curious group because they were entertainers, responsible for going to U.S. installations all over Asia. And they had no rank. They simply assumed whatever rank they were going to be with. Well, they especially sent my friend out to situations where there was trouble. Where, for example, there were bad relationships between the commander and the rank and file. And there was one such base inside China where there was an American colonel who was just a beast and a testy fellow. And they gave him orders to go in and take the stuffing out of that guy. So his act was the ventriloquist. And he had a dummy called the sad sack. And he got on the stage, and this huge auditorium in a tent or something was set up. And here was this colonel with a nurse sitting in the front row. And so he began a dialogue with his dummy, the sack, and began making rude remarks about the colonel and the command in this camp. Suddenly the colonel said, "Soldier, get off the stage." And so my friend said nothing, but the sad sack came back with some crack at him, you see. He said, "Soldier, get off the stage, or I'll be court-martialed." And despite anything the sack had said so far, there wasn't a laugh from the audience. They were frightened of the colonel, see. And suddenly, the sack said, "Oh, shut up, or I'll put you back in my jockstrap." And my friend said he had no idea. He had never premeditated such a remark. It simply came like that. And the house broke up. Just absolutely broke up. And the colonel just strode out of the room. He was completely deflated. That says to this day, it was the sack that said it. I didn't say it. So, it's this extraordinary thing, you see, that this thing can come to the rescue. When so often in situations of this kind, we think much later of the funny thing we should have said. And at the time, we're completely tongue-tied. And you see, you are tongue-tied, or action-tied, to the degree that you are anxious about the situation and are concerned with it. If you're not concerned, somehow everything is released. Well, you see, that's basically the whole process of training in Zen Buddhism, which is rather unique in this respect. It is a situation where you are in an environment with a teacher who constantly challenges you with problems that you cannot solve by ordinary thinking, and that you must come back at, without going through the process of conscious decision. The whole idea of a koan, you see, a Zen problem. Like, what is the sound of one hand? All these things are thought stoppers, thought blockers, which therefore can only be, they're barriers which you can only pass if you act without stopping to think. Now, you see, again, we think in our culture that a person who doesn't stop to think is thoughtless and is therefore irresponsible and unreliable. But while that is to a certain degree true, it is also true that a person who does stop to think is unreliable because he can't make decisions fast enough. So we are getting to a point now which is really rather good. We are handing over all decisions which require stopping to think to computers, which will analyze in a rational way these problems much faster than we can ever dream of doing. And therefore, since we will hand over these sort of responsible decisions to computers, we will be left free to exercise our hunch-like and spontaneous thinking in a much greater degree than before. Now, actually, though, this hunch-type thinking will apply to responsible decisions. I suppose it's always a matter of responsibility when you add up a line of figures. I personally have got an adding machine, and I don't bother with this anymore. But Buckminster Fuller was telling me the other day that he can read a line of figures like you read a line of print. And he can glance down a line and know its total. In fact, he can do 2 lines at once. And he just says he doesn't even think about it. He lets his mind do it. And he invariably comes out right. And this, of course, is the way in which they train people in fast reading. Simply assume that whatever you see, you will remember. Don't try to push your memory and say, gun, remember that, you see. Simply assume that your memory works. As I say, at first, this is will discourage us and not work because we're frightened of it. But if you do this in something that you're not frightened about because it is not very important, you will be able to see that it does work. And that you, as an organism, are fundamentally to be trusted. Now, of course, therefore, in the culture where Zen has played such a dominant part, say among the Japanese, all sorts of stories about how this works in relation to the various skills and crafts. The one I like best is about carpenters. The carpentry in old Japan is very definitely a yoga. And the carpenters always prided themselves in their freedom from any plans. In designing a house, they still, to this day, when you watch them, they have the very rough sketch of what's supposed to be done. And they do incredibly complicated joinery. You know those wooden Japanese puzzles you buy in all sorts of stores? They are simply a throw-off of the carpentry technique of joinery. They're put together, the beams at an angle at the corner of a building in the most amazing interlocked ways. Very beautiful. And for that, they do the whole thing by feel and by eye. No measurements. And they'll get absolutely clean fits without measurements. You see, wood is a vegetable. It's not like steel. And it's got all sorts of give and fluctuation in it. With the temperature, it changes. And therefore, they relate to it in an organic way instead of a mechanical way. I was once having a conversation with a Zen master through an interpreter who was a priest. And the interpreter was saying the Japanese carpenter, in not using a plan for his building, was very like the attitude of Zen in everyday life. So I posed a koan to those gentlemen. What happens in the case of the person who makes a blueprint but doesn't make a plan for it? Do you always make plans to make plans, and make plans to make plans to make plans? Of course you don't. And therefore, what I'm talking about is not an anti-intellectual approach to life, thoughtless in that sense. Because when a scholar does his work, and a scientist does his work, he can also do it in the same spirit. He can intellectualize spontaneously. He can be reasonable with his intuitive capacity of mind. But the carpenters were always having most marvelous happy accidents. There's the great story of two rival unions of carpenters in one town had been contracting to build a temple. And the people who had not got the contract were very angry with those who had. And the day came for raising the roof beam, which is a great ceremony. And when the master carpenter arrived to raise the roof beam early one morning, he suddenly found that it had been tampered with overnight, and that they had gone and cut 6 feet off it. And all the people who were measuring came and said to him, "This is terrible. What are we going to do?" He said, "Don't worry, it's perfectly all right. I'll fix it." And so he went up to the roof beam and solemnly struck it with his hammer and said, "Now, raise the ropes and put it in position." And zoop, it went up and fitted perfectly. So he had actually made it 6 feet too long, in the knowledge that some monkey business would be played. So, you know, the literature of what I would call applied Zen is just full of tales like that. Perhaps some of you have seen the film of Miyamoto Musashi. It was just called Samurai. And he was a great master of this kind of thing, because as he got older, he'd been a terrific swordsman. Nobody could defeat him. But he realized that his last battle was one in which he was absolutely challenged and forced into killing an absolutely beautiful young man who was a wonderful swordsman. And he just felt depressed about the whole thing. So he developed in his later life the no-sword school, of never having to use the sword at all, because he would outwit any opponent long before it got to the point of fighting. So he was one day traveling across the lake, big lake near Kyoto called Biwa. And on the ferry boat there was a very drunk and rambunctious samurai who challenged Musashi and said, "Ha, I see you're a swordsman. What school do you belong to?" And he said, "I belong to the no-sword school." And he said, "No-sword school, ha ha." And just drew his sword and said, "Let's see what you can do with your no-sword school." And Musashi said, "Now look, there are many people on this boat, and if we start fighting, innocent bystanders might get hurt. So why don't we go over to that island there, and we can fight it out there." So he said to the ferryman, "Take us over to the island." And as they came along shore, this drunk samurai was so eager for the fight that he leapt off the boat first onto the island. Musashi grabbed the boatman's oar and pushed the boat out into the water. He said, "There, you see my no-sword school." So, Hasegawa, who was a great Japanese artist and friend of mine, called all that kind of thing the controlled accident. And you see, in every art, this is the marvelous thing. Well, I pointed out last night in discussing my own sort of basic philosophy that what we are always looking for in life is a surprise. That we really don't want a life situation in which we have complete control over everything, and therefore all future happenings are known, because if they were known, they would already be past. Of such a future, we could say in our own inimitable slang, "You've had it." Now you see then, the accident that happens is the surprise. But pure accident is of no interest, because you realize the accidental only in terms of there being also something controlled which contrasts with it, just in the same way as you recognize a figure by its contrast with the background, or light by its contrast with darkness. So the accidental is realized in relation to the control, or we could say the random is recognized in relation to order, and vice versa. And therefore, what is sort of optimal in life is exactly then the controlled accident, where you can watch, for example, the Japanese potters doing designs on plates, and they'll pick up plate after plate, and they've got a brush with glaze, and they go like that, and all sorts of drips of glaze fall at random, but within a controlled swirl of the brush. And one after another, they'll just go on the stack like that. Every one of them different, because the chance falling of the drops was different each time. And yet, behind those falling drops, there was a rhythmically dancing hand. See, there was the element of control. And you can show this to yourself by a very simple formula, which I don't recommend that you put this on exhibit, but you can have a wonderful time if you proceed as follows. You take a black, heavy black brush full of ink, or a felt pen, and you make on a piece of paper completely random squiggles. Then, in a very careful way, you fill in all those squiggles with planned and highly controlled coloring. And you will see that you've made a rather interesting design. It may not be a great work of art yet, but it will certainly be something interesting, because of that combination of the random element and the planned and orderly element. But you have to allow the random to occur. And then the very skilled artist, of course, finds that he does his control things in a random way. As he gets to being able, as you all know, how to steer a car or ride a bicycle or whatever it is, or swim, quite thoughtlessly. Because the control is completely in the hands of the unconscious, non-attentive functioning of your mind or nervous system. So then, I'm saying that this way of functioning, not as an ego fighting and wrestling with the world, but as your organism working as an expression of the whole energy of this universe, of God, or whatever you want to call it, will work at anything that you do far more effectively that way than your present ideas of forcing it to do its job. And one has to be willing to take the risk of being a complete fool to make the transition from one way of working to the other. All right, let's have an internet. I thought that in discussing the yogas of everyday life, I should get rather specific and speak in detail about one of the yogas of everyday life as an example of all of them. When I could have chosen something exotic, like learning judo or archery or something like that. You've got a book, Zen in the Art of Archery, which does this for archery. But I thought it'd be much more interesting to talk about something nearer to home and discuss yoga in terms of cooking. Now, this is an art and a religion which in the United States we know a little about, especially in the last maybe 20 years, during which there has been an absolutely phenomenal sale of books on cooking, cookbooks of all kinds. They are among the best-selling books in this country. And but for all that, what we might call our public standards of cooking have not very much improved. Although you can find in homes and in individual life a great many excellent and accomplished cooks, still there are very few cases where the art of cooking itself becomes something of a yoga. And that's because we believe that so practical and everyday an affair cannot be spiritual. I've sometimes said, scratch an American and discover a Christian Scientist. Because there is a kind of universal feeling that the process of biology, which involves absolutely fundamentally eating, and eating of other living organisms, is something we're rather ashamed of. To have to be in the situation where you depend for your continued existence upon the destruction of animal and vegetable forms, And that is a formidable situation to be in. And it's one which we tend to gloss over and not really meet the challenge which this predicament offers to us. We would like to, in a way, meet the challenge, and we foresee perhaps an age when all food will be compounded synthetically in labs and be assimilated in the form of pills. And all you will have to do will be to take so many pills a day of different colors as prescribed by your physician, dietitian, in accordance with your needs. And you'll just take those particular small pills, and that will be that. You won't have to go through the crude, material and vulgar process of eating. Now, this would be very dangerous indeed if we got to that point, because it would allow us to imagine that we do not belong to the biological process, that we do not either have to eat other creatures, and what is still more important, be eaten by them. Human beings are trying and have been trying for years to be top species. And top species means the one who eats but does not get eaten. And therefore, we are the only species of life on Earth that hoards its own dead. Isn't that a fascinating and terrible thought? We hoard our own dead as if they were buried gold. And try, and have tried since the time of the ancient Egyptians, so to mummify and preserve dead human bodies that they are not devoured by worms and do not become manure for the ongoing process of life. And I feel that that's an extraordinarily ridiculous feature of our existence, and is somehow connected with our failure to know and to feel that we are continuous with the rest of the universe, that we are one life with it. But to the extent that we don't feel that, to the extent that we have been brought up to consider ourselves as external observers and controllers of the rest of nature, the heads of nature, the chieftains of nature, to that extent we resist belonging to the mutual eating society which biology is, and to the extent that we refuse to belong to it, we become the most predatory monster on the face of the earth, who is destroying itself and its own life indirectly more effectively and swiftly than even swarms of locusts. There are, of course, from time to time in the biological world, phenomena where the predatory animal, insect or mouse or rat or whatever it is, simply eats itself out of existence. And we could very easily do just that. We could become a species of life which conquers this planet and which has no natural enemy. That is to say, no other form of life which feeds on us. And the moment you're in the position where you have no natural enemy, nothing that feeds on you, nothing to which you can offer your body and say, this is my body which is given for you, do this in remembrance of me. Once you're in that position, you are in a fatal position, because nothing will then stop you from devouring everything in sight until you start becoming a cannibal, eating up your own kind in one way or another, That's going to be the end of you. It is therefore not insignificant that in this particular culture, where cooking is not really an honored art, except among really a rather small segment of elite, dilettante food fanciers, that there should be a popular way of death, the way of the American mortician, which is aimed at preventing the human corpse from being reassimilated into the life cycle. They are all pickled in formaldehyde and put in enormous bronze caskets in concrete graves, so that the beneficent offices of the worm and the maggot shall be frustrated. Now you've spent all your lives absorbing into your system the products of the soil. And therefore it is your biological duty to return to the soil what you got from it, both in terms of sewage and in terms of your own corpse when the time comes to die. For the most fertile fields have been found in times past to be fields of battle, where many corpses lay dead and were absorbed into the soil, and they grow magnificent wheat. The cycle of life goes on. But we are resisting this. And the resistance to giving our bodies back to the earth goes hand in hand with our general disregard of what we call ecology. Ecology is the science of the relationship between living organisms and their physical environments. And it's one of the most important branches of science that there is. If we do not pay attention to the science of ecology, we more and more tend to be beings who foul our own nests and who create what we would call spoiled environments. Would-be tourists are always asking about various foreign countries, is it spoiled yet? That means, doesn't it, have enough of us visited the place to make it no longer worth visiting? Have we turned the Hawaiian Islands, the Caribbean, Japan, Burma, Ceylon, anywhere you like, have we turned it into a tourist trap? A place, in other words, where you can no longer find human beings in their natural state, but find them in a new state. What I would call the early technological state of being at war with nature, of continuing the Jewish and Christian superstition that man is to be top dog. That man is, as it were, not a feature of nature, but a stranger in the earth who has, as it were, come into this planet as an embodied spirit, and whose nature as being spiritual is alien to the nature of the earth. It's curious, you see, that even since the 19th century, since the rise of what we call scientific naturalism, since the rise of a philosophy of life in which supernaturalism and the supernatural origin of man are repudiated, and we look upon ourselves as products of an evolutionary process rather than a supernatural process, we evolved, yes, according to the doctrines, indeed the dogmas of scientific naturalism, we evolved from our lower animal friends. But the people who believe in this philosophy are even more than traditional Christians and Jews antagonistic to the processes of nature. The outcome of scientific naturalism is a technology which is dedicated to the conquest of nature, because it's based on a doctrine which we deeply resent, even though most of us believe it. And this doctrine is that the natural universe is a mechanical process, which, because it is mechanical and nothing other than mechanical, that is to say, because it can be described and accounted for in a strictly logical way, we curiously therefore feel that it is essentially stupid. All machines, even though we revere them and depend on them, are regarded as stupid in the sense that they have no art, in the sense that they are purely logical, and therefore do not care about the things that human beings really care about. They have no love in them. And we believe, you see, if you are brought up in the tradition of thought of 19th century science, that the universe is fundamentally lacking in love. It doesn't give a damn. It has no feeling. It has no intelligence. The human being is an evolutionary fluke that has come into this world as a result of a chance permutation and combination of biological elements. We therefore, this superstition about the nature of man goes hand in hand with some of the superstitions of science. Not that these superstitions are any longer held by really understanding scientists, but it is fundamental to scientific superstition that the human being can stand in the situation of an objective observer of any given situation. That you can, as it were, be impartial and view what is going on with a cold, calculating intellect that sees what is as distinct from what one might wish to be. And a person who is the victim of what I would call scientism, as distinct from science, is very liable to suppose that we are afflicted by wishful thinking, and that if you are the kind of person who is reliable, objective, and clear, you are one who must necessarily take a grim and dim view of the universe, because that will advertise the fact that you are tough-minded. And to be tough-minded will be your particular pandona, or point of honor. And so you will look upon all those who regard the universe as being in some way vital or intelligent as woolly-minded, because you will give yourself a case of extreme intellectual porcupinism, of being prickly in your attitude to all facts, analytic, hard-boiled, definite, precise, and rigorous. And that will advertise the fact that you are, after all, someone who has come to your senses. Actually lost your senses. You've only found your mind. And it's very truly said that you have to go out of your mind to come to your senses. That is to say, you have to be liberated from the confusion of the symbolic world with the real world, and I've talked a great deal about that thus far. But here is, you see, the great problem of 20th century man basing his way of life on 19th century ideas, which are today the common sense of most educated individuals, that there is an implacable resentment against our biological situation. We endeavor in myriads of different ways to conceal the fact that we are biological beings. Our clothes, our social institutions, in ever so many ways, are trying to say, we are not mammals. And anything that emphasizes our mammalian qualities is really considered vulgar. Of course, we can't resist the truth that we are mammals, and that's why American men are absolutely fascinated by female mamma, by breasts. Because, you know, truth will out. So then, when it comes down to a very, very fundamental biological science and art, the art of so rendering food that it becomes extremely well absorbable, we have our qualms, and we don't really go to it. And yet, you see, as I suggested in the previous talk here, the human being is like a whirlpool in water. The human being is a pattern of life, which is a particular form of activity in a stream, but the human stream consists of water, milk, wheat, cow, vegetables, all foodstuffs whatsoever are in the process of being processed by us. In your lifetime, you have processed innumerable tons of groceries. And therefore, you are what you eat. Every fiber and cell of your bodies is beef steak and potatoes and so on in the course of being processed humanly. And therefore, those people who stand at the entryway whereby this stream enters the human organism and becomes changed into our form is in a very responsible position. For as cook, standing at the kitchen range, you are most veritably a priest at an altar. And if you do not realize the priestly and magical nature of your function as a cook, you are doing the human race a great disservice. But the trouble is, of course, that the average person who cooks in our culture is a harassed housewife. Who has to do this every day to get meals ready for children and adults who are fundamentally in a hurry to do something else other than eat. Breakfast in the morning is usually a madhouse because everybody has to get up to get the children off to school in time and get the husband of the family off to work in time. And this is usually postponed to the last minute, among other reasons, because, of course, going to bed the night before was postponed to the last minute. Because there was some fun going on the night before, and because of which one had to hurry through dinner in order to get out to it, whatever it was. And we do tend to regard meals as medicine rather than diet. We will take packages of ordinary foodstuffs, and we will find on them in small print the same sort of chemical analysis of what's in it as you get in a bottle of pills. Every package of food has to have its contents spelled out, you see, as if it were medicine. You buy, say, an ordinary envelope of gelatin, and there's a chemical formula on it. Because we are looking at this food for what good it will do for us. We are firmly of the opinion, therefore, that we eat in order to live rather than that we live in order to eat. Therefore, the pleasures of the table, the art of the kitchen, is simply relegated to being a means to an end. It enables us to continue our biological existence in order to what? Make money. Or be cultured. And people who listen to music or go to plays or read books with the motivation of becoming cultured people never listen to the music, don't understand the play, and don't really read books. Because they always have one eye on what kind of person this activity is turning me into, what status it gives me. Therefore, one never really does it. So in order to be human, in order to be cultured and civilized in the highest sense of the word, it is absolutely necessary to everyday life that we take the art of cooking sincerely, that we regard the process that goes on at the table as one of fundamental spiritual and religious importance, and make it a yoga. Not only what goes on in the kitchen, but also what goes on at the table itself must, for us, become an occasion where we regard ourselves as involved in one of the most important, worthwhile things that we do. Because you see, if you only eat in order to live, you will not digest your food properly. You will bolt it, wolf it down just to stop the gnawing. And so, I must quote Henry Miller. Throw anything down the hatch to stop the gnawing feeling and swallow a dozen vitamins. If that doesn't work, see a surgeon. If that doesn't work, get a Hollywood funeral. They're the duckiest, the cutest funerals. Why? You can have your beloved propped up, reading something like the Bhagavad Gita and smoking a cigarette. Forever. Cigarette guaranteed not to rot away before the lips or the buttocks. Oh, death, where is thy sting? Oh, grave, where is thy victory? Jolly, what, eh? But that's the problem, you see, of this using food merely as a means to an end. I was in the airport trying to find something for lunch just before coming down here, and there were 3 girls in their late teens sitting at a table next to us. And their lunch consisted of French fried potatoes with ketchup and Coca-Cola. That's what they were putting down. And this sort of thing goes on all over the place. Lucius Beebe, who was a great bon vivant, once said that south of the Mason-Dixon line, everything is fried in rancid axle grease. And that's pretty much true. I remember not so long ago that for my sins, I was lecturing in the state of Virginia. And I was in colleges most of the time, you see. And I was condemned, therefore, to eat the offerings of college cafeterias and sorority and fraternity house cooking. And it was so abundant that I literally starved. You may say I'm fussy, but I will not eat unless I am literally starving, and have been starving for days and days when anything will taste good. But a normal person should not be asked to eat the incredible messes of ruthlessly boiled vegetables, meat that has suffered in electronic purgatories for hours, and is served to you in a gravy that is made of water, bouillon cubes, and library paste. This is simply not fit for human consumption, and the fact that the whole academic world, without question, faculty and students, eat this notorious garbage, is of course rotting their brains and making them highly uncivilized. It's just unpardonable. There is no excuse for this at all. And part of the reason is that college kitchens are supervised by dietitians as distinct from cooks. And these two classes of persons are really mutually exclusive. Because the dietitian thinks of food in terms of its chemical contents, in terms of its calories, its vitamins, its proteins, and so thinks through a test tube. Whereas an accomplished cook thinks with his tongue, and with his belly, and with what fundamentally is good for his gut. And an accomplished cook comes from a long tradition, be it of French cooking, or of Chinese cooking, or of Indonesian cooking, Indian cooking, or whatever it is. He has a long, long historical tradition behind him of excellence. And the French cook, no one is more proud, no one is more delighted with his art. And the vintner who goes with him is also equally important as a person in seeing that human beings remain civilized at the table, and that the table is not simply treated in the same way as the bathroom. The bathroom is the output room, and is always sort of relegated to unconsciousness, because we don't like to admit that we do these things. And so when you carry the bathroom attitude to the kitchen, as I suggested already, the kitchen begins to look like a bathroom because it is just the input room. And no real reverence is accorded to the art of cooking. Well, I think that if we want to have a true civilization, we want to be people of great culture, great humanity, a lot of it begins in the kitchen. And goes on around the eating table. In Christianity, after all, we have the Mass as a central rite. The Holy Communion, the eating of bread and the drinking of wine, because in Mediterranean civilization at the time when Jesus lived, bread was the staple food and wine was the staple drink. People didn't drink water, for God's sake, because you could never trust water, what was in it. Therefore, if you had a certain alcoholic content in the water, it was drinkable. But beyond that, of course, the nurture of grapes and the production of very fine, loved and matured wines was a way of bottling sunshine. And you will find to this day that in any restaurant where wine is not served in Western culture, they do not understand food. Food and wine in the Western tradition are inseparable. And wine is not alcohol in the sense of vodka or whiskey or whatever is hard liquor. Wine is food. And when an Italian family is asked a questionnaire to put down what it spends on food, what it spends on drink, they will always include the wine under the food expenditure. They don't imagine that it's spent on drink. Yes, they would say, all right, if we bought some whiskey, that would be drink, as distinct from food, but wine is food. And so these things blend themselves together. And when anybody who really understands wine opens a bottle of wine, you will notice that they always do it with a certain ritualistic attitude. They will carefully draw the cork, and they will sniff the cork to see that the flavor is all right. Then they will pour a little wine into a glass and allow it to roll around the glass. And you should always use a rather, for table wines like Clarets, Burgundies, Chablis, Sauterne, all those wines, you should use a rather large glass, what the French call it ballon, a balloon glass, so that almost like brandy, you can catch the perfume of the wine in the glass. And you roll the wine around and sniff it, and you may take a tiny sip to see that it's all right. Meanwhile, the wine pourer stands beside you to see if you approve. It may be yourself as host of the table. You put it down, and then you serve the other guests, but you don't fill this kind of glass to the top. You fill it about 1/3 or 1/2, so that an area is left above the wine to catch the perfume. And then you gently savor it. You don't wolf it down in a gulp. Now you see there's a ritualistic attitude to that. Wine is something precious and valued. And if you follow wine and are interested in it, you can learn the art, for example, of being almost blindfold. I don't mean that literally. It's the bottle that's blindfolded, because you need your eyes as well as your nose and tongue to test wines. You need to look at it, how it clings or doesn't cling to the side of the glass, and so on. And experts, of course, can guess rather accurately what wine they're drinking, where it's from. It's not easy to, in fact, it's probably not a fairy tale that people can pin down the actual vineyard. Just they can do so occasionally in a fluky way if they happen, for example, to be the manufacturer of that wine itself. They might pin down the actual vineyard. But you see, wherever wine is revered, the serving of wine is attended with ritual. Now I'm pointing out what is good cooking also is attended with ritual, because you are, as cook, a priest at an altar, and you are at a vital moment in human life, in the point where other biological existences, be they animal or vegetable, are being transformed so as to enter the human system and to become us. And so, as Lin Yutang once beautifully put it, a fish which has died for you and is not well cooked has died in vain. Here you see we face a serious ethical problem, since we do depend on all these other creatures for our life. What is our responsibility towards it? You can't avoid this. You can become a vegetarian if you're squeamish about it, but that's only a gesture. You're still destroying living beings to eat apples, tomatoes, cabbages, lettuce, all those things, cereals. You're still destroying other forms of life. And so the only possible good ethical response to finding ourselves in this situation is not only, of course, the obvious one of putting to good use the energies which we derive from them, but also the immediate respect, shall I say, the grace, the thanksgiving of honoring what we eat by cooking it to perfection. And perfect cooking will involve, therefore, ritual, because ritual is actually any activity whatsoever done with full attention and care. When you watch a surgeon, or even a lowly dentist at work, and he's a good surgeon or a good dentist, you will notice that he has a certain ritualistic attitude to the way he disposes his tools and to the order in which he does things. There are certain dentists whom you recognize at once as having surgeon's fingers. They are loving, quiet, peace-giving fingers that work with a kind of quick but unhurried expertness. And you can see the same thing in a driver of a car or in any expert workman at any craft whatsoever. And you will always see he goes about what he's doing with a certain way of behaving that is very much like the behavior of a priest at an altar. Now, I don't know how many people know much about what priests do at altars. Even Catholics don't always know very much about this. And they think ceremony, 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 a lot of empty gesturing. But actually, the way in which a priest celebrates the Mass is quite practical. All the ceremonies connected with it were originally functional activities. Why are the candles on an altar? We think a candle is a way of lighting a candle beside something is a way of paying respect to it. Well, yeah, but originally one needed some light to see what you were doing, to read any book you might have, and why was incense offered at altars? We think Protestants especially have what we call Protestant noses and find incense in church very repugnant. But that is all connected with our putting down of the sense of smell. This is one of the most interesting things in our culture, is our repression of smell. It tells a great deal about us. Taste depends to an enormous degree on smell. We can actually only identify 4 kinds of taste with the tongue. 4 dimensions of taste. And the real savoring of food depends, A, on its texture, and B, on its smell. That is, when you get a very bad cold, you notice that you don't taste your food. But yet, in the English language, we have only 3 words to distinguish qualities of smell: acrid, pungent, and fragrant. All other words which we use to denote smell are borrowed from other senses. We are noseless. Chesterton put it in a line of one of his poems, and goodness only noses the noselessness of man. Dogs Cats, all creatures, are very conscious of smell and find their way by it. But we, when we say it's like the person who was alleged to have got into a coach with Dr. Johnson, a very fastidious lady, being in the 18th century when people weren't very fastidious about washing, she looked at him and said, "Sir, you smell." He said, "On the contrary, madam, you smell. I stink." You see, we don't like smells. And particularly, we don't like the smell of the human organism. We would rather smell of disinfectant, of Lavoris, or something chemical like that, than we would smell of people. And therefore, the clean, good, healthy, Western civilized type of person smells of chemicals. In fact, he smells like a public toilet, rather than smelling human. And to be smelly, you see, is to be stinky. It means the same thing. And therefore, curiously, the sense of smell becomes the transmission sense of the unconscious. It becomes immensely important just because it's repressed. And we get all kinds of messages, which, for reasons that we don't understand, influence our likes and dislikes of other people. We like the people who smell good to us, and dislike the people who don't smell good to us, although this never passes through conscious analysis. An enormous amount of communication comes this way. Memories, for example, are wonderfully evoked by smells. All sorts of situations in childhood, when we weren't so unconscious of smell, are evoked. It's why we like the smell of freshly cooking coffee so much. It reminds us of wonderful breakfasts long ago, of home, of mother, of the kitchen. The smells of freshly cooking bacon, you know, all that sort of thing. Goes with the smell of burning autumn leaves and all these really cherished smells. And immediately evoke memories. And that's why, you see, in Buddhist and Hindu and Catholic worship, incense is used. Because there are certain smells connected with the, shall I say, the religious consciousness, which evoke that consciousness. And in a very, very powerful way. So then, this is the sort of mystery that goes on at altars, where people are doing things that indicate basically reverence for life. Albert Schweitzer. Reverence for life. This is the sacrificial bread and the sacrificial wine upon which your life depends, and therefore honor is done to it. The Christian idea of the communion is really very, very simple. Because the meaning of the Mass, which Jesus was trying to point out, was that the Christ sacrifice was basically the grinding up of wheat and the crushing of grapes, the sacrifice of every living creature which maintains the human species. This is my body which is given for you. Therefore, the death of all creatures which give other creatures life is the ongoing process of love, of self-offering, which constitutes the very nature of the biophysical world. And therefore, if you say grace before meals, what you should really thank is the dead cow, the dead fish, or the crushed grain which you are about to eat. And say to this, Thank you very much for allowing your life to be transformed into mine. And so the natural outcome of grace is eventually to allow your life to be transformed into the life of other beings still, be they ever so humble, be they merely bacteria or worms, because they in their turn are a sort of yeast from which life continues to go on. So now, all those of you here who are at any time engaged in cooking must become aware of the high dignity of this art and of the possibilities in it for yoga and self-realization. No more must you ever throw something together to stop the gnawing feeling. There is no point whatsoever in cooking without giving yourself adequate time for it. Because you will find that time spent on other things, to such an extent that it affords no time for cooking, is a way of wasting your life on abstract fripperies instead of